Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's Race C is the very first time we've had a 40-minute Race C. Luckily, it's Group 3, which is already pretty balanced, but some of the usual suspects are a little bit OP. Let's get into it. Once again, the McLaren 650S is the anti-meta car of the week. Not quite fast enough to compete for the top spots in the time trial, it is, however, a monster on the track. It has really good tire wear, and you do not need to refuel up even if you're revving it out all the way during the entire race. The fastest cars on the leaderboard appear to be the M6, AMG, and the GTR. Like always, there is a little bit of variety, but those three definitely dominate the leaderboards. There are two 650s in the .8s and two of them in the .9s, and that's it for the top 100. I put it in 64th place overall. A big shout out to AZR for helping me out with figuring out the pace for the race. Like I said, like usual, there are a lot of different cars in the top 100. There's even a Beetle, hilariously enough. Suzuka is a very tough track, and T1 is actually one of the most difficult parts of it, so if you get past that, you're going to be just fine. Looking at the meter boards on the left, we want to look for the 50 meter board. At the little access road right before that, we're actually going to start turning in before braking. Turn in just slightly, then start braking directly afterwards. Aiming for the first curb, we want to downshift to third right at the end of it, and then to second at the beginning of the next curb on the left. For this particular car, I like to take a really tight line before going out for turn 2. Be really patient here and make sure you stay on the brakes for long enough, and then if you have to, feel free just to coast as well before getting on the throttle. You do not want to go off here at all. Move yourself to the right side of the track, and when you see the end of the colored wall on the right, that is when you're going to start turning in for the next corner. What you want to do is turn in and then lift off afterwards. Only lift off as much as you need to get all the way up on the curb and then get back on the throttle, continuing to turn left before the next corner. I like to continue turning left so I'm left of the middle of the track before starting to turn in for the next corner. As you turn in, lift and then downshift a second, adding just a little bit of brakes. We want to hit the apex at the very end of the curb here. Get back on the throttle and continue steering to the right as you exit. We want to be at least in the middle of the track, if not slightly to the right of the middle by the end of the curb there on the left. Take note of my steering and throttle to see that I'm still full throttle as I initiate the turn, and then I lift just slightly to get all the way up on this curb. I like to go full throttle straight to the beginning of this curb. We're going to treat this as a double apex corner. Right at the beginning of the curb, we're going to turn in, downshift a second, and brake just gently. We want to stay really close to this curb. We're going to hit the first apex, not trail out very wide, stay a little bit on the brakes, then come off the brakes so we can turn in again and get really close, if not all the way up on it before getting on the throttle. Staying full throttle and trying to get as far to the right as we possibly can, we're once again going to use the end of the curbing on the left to determine when we should change directions. Shift up to third gear as you switch directions, and for this next part, we just need to barely lift the throttle, only enough to get right in the middle of this curb right here. Nailing the timing for getting on full throttle on the exit of this corner is just going to take some experience. You can kind of see where the end of the colored wall is in the distance, and right about when you're aimed at that direction, you'll know that you can get fully on the throttle. Staying fully on the throttle as early as possible on this corner is one of the many keys to getting as much speed as you can out of this track. For the famous Degner corners, get yourself all the way to the left of the track, and right before the 50 meter board, approximately one car length before it, we're going to hit the brakes heavily, and you want to be turning in by the time you get to the 50 meter board. You want to use the curb. I missed it a little bit, but you want to avoid the high part of the curb, so it's better to miss it a little bit than it is to go too high, because your car will get unsettled and you will spin. When you're on the curb on the exit, which you should be on, you want to angle your car so that as you hit the brakes, you're going to come off the curb before you go into the grass. Unfortunately, no specific marks on the track really exist, or at least none that I've ever been able to find. Essentially, you just want to brake about 20 meters before the end of the curb. Turn in once your car is all the way past that curb that ended on the left, and try to use as much of this curb as you can, getting back on the throttle and maintaining as much momentum as you can because it is a very slow corner. You can use all that runoff as long as two tires are on the other side of the white line. Stay on this side of the track so you can turn and line yourself up with the track on the other side of this kink. Right before this orange flag is when we're going to brake. Brake heavily all the way down to first gear until you get to this cushioned barrier on the right. That is when you're going to turn in. You can use first gear to exit. Second gear is probably faster as long as you can keep up your momentum around the corner, but I was actually really struggling with that, and I was more consistent using first gear. You just have to make sure that you don't spin the tires, because any kind of wheel spin right here is going to kill all your momentum and it will ruin your lap. So for this long sweeping kind of a corner, you don't really have to go wide whatsoever. I like to just hug the inside. I used to go wide here, but it really just wastes time and it doesn't really save your tires by doing so. After this final curb, look for the meter boards, and after the 100, you're going to see this little access road. That is your braking point. Staying heavy brakes as we turn in at the 50-meter board, we're going to come off the brakes really early, downshift to second, and then get back on that throttle really heavily. You've got to be really brave and make sure you use as much of this curb as you can without going all the way up on the green part. You can see the nice little convenient tire marks to show you exactly when you should be turning in, but essentially when you're lined up with the outside of the curb, that's when you're going to gently brake and turn in. Too much braking or steering is going to cause a lot of understeer, and any understeer will transition to oversteer as soon as you get on the throttle. Get on the throttle early though, and just be gentle with both steering and the throttle to make sure that you go all the way out to this curb part, but you don't slide whatsoever. To be as efficient as possible, you do want to move to the left side of the track as it curves here, and then slowly track out to the end of the straight part on the right. Align yourself with the right side of the track and keep your eyes open for the meter boards. At the 50-meter board, we're just going to turn in and lift slightly, only as much as you need to put your right tires on the curb and then get back on that throttle, tracking out all the way here. It's all about keeping as much speed as you possibly can through that corner. Quickly get yourself to the left side and look for the 100-meter board. There's a nice little dark spot that stays on the white line right here, and at the beginning of that is where I like to start braking. Brake in a straight line and get all the way down to first gear until you get all the way past the 50-meter board, then we're going to start turning in. As soon as you go over this first curve, get back into second gear and gently get back on the throttle. Then turn in and lift just gently to make sure you only touch the inside of the curb with the right tires. Tracking all the way out onto this curb, avoiding the green if you can, and then stay very tight on the exit to make sure you get the very best time that you can. Going wide here will cost you at least a couple thousandths. There's usually a lot of discussion in how to take the first corner, which is actually corners 1 and 2, but I like to take it really tight in this car because this car does tend to oversteer on corner entry. Obviously, theoretically, you'd be able to keep up a higher speed if you went wide there, but the runoff area, the area after you get on the throttle, is pretty short until you have to get on the brakes again, so it's not really worth going super wide if your car rotates really well. If you're struggling with the S's, I'd say start with braking as little as possible and then try to hit really late apexes on everything leading up to this double apex corner. This left-hander is known as Dunlop, and the earlier you can get on the throttle and stay on the throttle, the better, but it's really scary because if you go off there, it's grass and it's uphill and it's really fast. You'll just go off and stay off. Avoid the high part of the curb on Degner 1, you do not want to touch that, and use as much of the curb on Degner 2 as you possibly can. Like I said before, if you can get your car to rotate, you can use second gear here, but I was able to more reliably use first gear and more consistently get out of that corner really quickly using first. I do think in the end it would be faster for the fastest possible lap to use second, but I was able to really consistently get a pretty quick time using first gear on the exit. Spoon curve, which is what the next two corners is known as. It's a very famous corner and it's very, very difficult. The first corner is not intuitive and the second one is it's strange elevation wise, so it's really easy to get understeer, and if you get any understeer at the beginning, you're going to get oversteer at the end and it's going to either send you off track, spin you, or just ruin your lap time. For 130R, it's all about bravery. You've got to make sure you're going as fast as you possibly can, which means that you have to lift off as little as you can, and you can really eat up a lot of the curb by going over it like that. A big mistake people make here is turning in before they slow down efficiently, and another big mistake is turning in too late. You actually have to turn in pretty early, but you've got to make sure that you slow your car down and you're not turning in way before your car slows down. And for the final corner, stay really tight to make sure you don't waste time on the end of your lap. This is the first time that we've had a deliberate 40-minute race. There was one point in time when there was a Le Mans race, and it was something crazy. It was, I can't remember how many laps it was, but it translated to being about 40 minutes. However, that was a mistake. You could see that they had only allotted 30 minutes for the race, on top of the fact that there was a race starting every half hour. They fixed it the very next day. This time it appears to be deliberate. Not only does it say that you need 50 minutes allotted for the race, but it also only has one race per hour. So this is very exciting, and I really hope this is kind of a sneak preview into the direction that they're taking the game. It would be incredible if Race C had really long options, or if there was even like a Race D or something like that. We've been talking about that for years, but this is a very, very welcome addition. Back to the race itself, I actually had a pretty clean third place solid finish from the back, where I was able to battle a couple of our friends, and it was just a really solid race overall, but I don't think that it really showed off what this car can do against the meta cars, or really at all. This race was just hilarious from the start, but I ended up pulling back a recovery drive, and I think this is a better showcase of what this car can do. So for the strategy itself, one pit stop is required. There's nothing else that's actually required. You do not need to take tires. You do not need to take fuel. Actually, you never need to take fuel as long as you save enough, but you are not required to change tires. However, it is much faster to actually change tires. The M6, while incredibly fast and pretty good on tires, is not great on fuel, and you'll actually have to either save fuel or you'll have to refuel. This car does not require any kind of refueling whatsoever. You can go full bore the entire time and still have fuel left over. Now, as you know, Suzuka is pretty scary on its own, but that also means it's scary for other people, and things like this can happen. But here, as I find myself completely turned around, we can showcase exactly why it's really amazing that we have a 20-lap race. If this were a 10-lap race, this would be all over for me. But no, this is only 1 minute into a 40-minute race. We're going to see what I can do. Now, I'm not quite sure why Mike was waiting for me. I think he might have just hoped that I'd be able to run a little bit faster or something like that, but I hope he doesn't think that it was his fault, because it was absolutely not his fault, and I do want to take this opportunity to publicly apologize to Mike. If you saw my race at the Nürburgring where I won after being in nearly last place, I made some assumptions about what Mike was doing. And while Mike was upset with me, and we have been upset with each other in the past, all that's over. That's in the past. We've had our disagreements, we've had incidents on track, but long before that, we were friends. We've been exchanging a lot of messages back and forth. We haven't had a chance to actually talk, like in voice chat or on a phone call yet, but I want to take this time to officially apologize to you, Mike. I did you dirty, you deserve better than that, and I hope that we can rekindle our friendship in the future. I love you, buddy. Speaking of the future, we actually have to jump to lap 4 before anything exciting happened. One of the big things that's commonly discussed in this game is both the slipstream and the dirty air which you get from following cars. Starting a little bit more than 5/10 behind this guy, you can see that the slipstream, while usually very powerful, is not super powerful, and we only gain about 1/10 before the next braking zone. Dirty air is pretty severe in the Group 3 class, so this is a showcase of one of the most beautiful things about the McLaren. The car handles incredibly well, and that does not stop when you get even really close in the dirty air. It's actually one of the things you're going to have to pay attention to. Pretty much all of the meta cars are not going to be nearly as fast as this car for the very first sector, so you're going to have to be careful and make sure that you give them ample space to brake and ample time to get back on the accelerator. If you've been around for a while, then you know that I constantly talk about the concept of knowing when it's really a good idea to let someone pass versus giving them a battle. While it's 100% within someone's right, especially if they're on the exact same strategy to defend in any situation, if you find someone closing in extremely fast, or if you just happen to know that they're going to be a faster driver than you, letting them go could actually be beneficial for both people. If you defend a lot against someone who you know is inevitably going to get in front of you, then you're just going to waste time for both of you. And at the end of the race, if you happen to lose just one position towards the end, and that time was wasted trying to defend against someone you knew that was going to pass you, well, then you kind of did that to yourself. Especially with long races like this, you've got to think of the long game. So if someone who's much faster than you comes up, just let them go. Unless it's towards the end and you might actually have a chance to save your position, it's almost always a better chance to just let them go and not waste the time. Now, with that said, back to the actual strategy itself. If this race had gone well, our plan would be to go in the pits sometime earlier than other people would go in the pits. Most of the time, the pit window is going to be somewhere between lap 8 and 12, but with this car, you can actually stretch it a little bit further than that in either direction. And that brings us to my big mistake that actually cost me multiple positions. On the previous lap, our friends Ryder and Outlaw had been just in front of me, and they had gone into the pits. I thought that maybe if I was able to overcut them, then I would be able to get all the way in front of them by the time I came out of the pits. There are two things I didn't consider. One, I actually lifted off trying to go in the pits before realizing both of them were going in the pits, which slowed me down tremendously. Two, I was on old tires and they were on fresher tires. I, at the time, knew that I had better pace than them. I'm not trying to say that I'm better than them, but I knew that I had better pace than them at the current time in the race and from the races that we had done earlier, because our buddy Outlaw was in the Jaguar, which is still absolutely tragic. Our friend Mr. Elsie was actually telling me to extend my first stint, and I thought, yeah, lap 10's the perfect time to do that after completely screwing up the almost pit. But anyways, this is my apology to Mr. LC and my admission that I made a huge strategical error. If I had waited 2 more laps and gone as fast as I possibly could, then I possibly could have come out in front of Outlaw, but because I didn't, I was then stuck behind these two. I can't stress this part enough that it feels really weird just outright saying that I'm faster than someone. But in this race, Outlaw's laps were not great just because he's in the Jaguar, and that car is an absolute tragedy. And Ryder, I knew from previous races that we've done today that if I'm in front of him, then I was able to go a little bit faster. But I digress. I'm sorry for saying that I was faster than you two right now, but yeah, it feels weird saying that. Anyways, I'm going to go back to just stating facts. I was faster, I could go faster, but I made a mistake and I ended up behind them, so I was at the mercy of their pace. This actually brings me to a very good point that I need to make. The McLaren does not have very good acceleration or top speed. It kind of lacks power in general. If you are faster than any given car over a lap, but those cars have much more power, it's going to be incredibly difficult to pass that car on this track with this car. It's not impossible, so you'll have to be very aggressive, but you can also just use a much better strategy or just a different strategy to ensure that you have as much time on track with completely free air. The M6 itself isn't tremendously faster than this, but the Jag is much faster in a straight line, so the M6 with the slipstream from the Jag is very difficult to get in front of. Your best opportunity to pass is super late braking or being very aggressive in any of the S's at the very beginning, the first sector of the track. Since I messed up 130R, there was absolutely nothing I can do to get close enough to get good slipstream, and so they were just pulling away. My plan now is going to be to get just as close as I possibly could to these guys so I could try to strike at any moment that they showed any kind of weakness, and then our boy Ryder went off. You hate to see it, but the racer in me, of course, loves a free position. Thank you, Ryder, I love you. Jumping forward to lap 15, Outlaw actually just let me pass without any kind of a battle. I don't know if he was just being nice because he's a sweetheart, or if he just knew that the tires were going to fall off. He was actually going really fast in the Jag, but like I said, the car is still a travesty. It got a buff recently, but with its weight and the current power it has, it is really fast in a straight line, but the tires just get destroyed, and so it's really difficult to maintain any kind of pace or just drive safely with it. Another car that's really fast in a straight line, but can kind of slow down when the tires start wearing, is the Mustang. And King Ghidorah, also known as Plaka Plum, is a fantastic dude, and honestly, I think he was just trying to let me go. I think he probably didn't want to waste a lot of time defending, but I think on the other hand, he might just be really nice. A lot of times he just lets me go, doesn't want to battle too much. I don't think he realizes how fast he is. He's actually a very fast driver, but yeah, like I said, he's just a sweet dude, so he just let me go there without any kind of a battle. He actually lifted so I could get an optimal line going into that corner. And so thanks to him and thanks to Outlaw, we found ourselves in 4th place after being in last place for a second. Jumping forward one more lap, we finally catch this Porsche. Now, the Porsche was actually one of the anti-meta car candidates. However, there are a couple reasons I didn't want to choose it. One, it can get pretty sketchy when the tires wear, especially on this corner, which is scary enough by itself. And 2, it's not nearly as fuel efficient as the McLaren. You do have to save the fuel just a little bit if you're driving the Porsche. It's not a lot, but it is a little bit. The benefits of the Porsche are incredible acceleration though, making it really difficult to pull off any kind of pass. So even if you get it on the outside, or if you have a really good line on the inside, with the McLaren, you're probably still going to lose out to the Porsche because it accelerates so well. So there are actually very few places where you can pull off a pass and make it stick. Since you can be more aggressive with the McLaren, because it will be nicer on the tires and it'll be less slippery, then you can put a lot of pressure on the Porsche. And when you can use all of the fuel, that does end up making a difference compared to having to save fuel with the Porsche. Right here's a perfect example. I was able to get a wider line and I got on the throttle pretty much at the exact same time that he did, and he is pulling away by a lot coming out of that corner. The McLaren really does suffer from the low speed acceleration. Not to be deterred, however, we just stuck with him, and even though he is also in a handling car, like I said, this thing does way better on the tires, and I think my tires actually might be slightly newer than his as well. I'm not 100% sure on that. The biggest downfall, however, for the Porsche is having an even lower top speed than this car. While it accelerates incredibly well out of corners, that acceleration dissipates pretty quickly. So the best time to try to overtake the Porsche is after staying really close, leading to the end of the lap, and then trying to get in front of them using their slipstream leading into T1, and that is exactly what we're trying to do right here. Liu was not making very many mistakes. We were able to stick just close enough with him, and even though he had better acceleration initially, you can see that that quickly dissipates. I'm not quite sure if he was just giving me this position by not defending, or if he thought he could actually defend on the outside, but either way, he stayed right there. We dove on the inside, and that was that. I may have mentioned this, I actually can't remember, so I'm going to mention it again. If you do find yourself oversteering into T1, don't even worry about it. Just keep your input steady, stay on the brakes a little bit. You can even get on the throttle to balance it out, but if you do experience a little oversteer going into there, it's just going to turn into neutral steer. You're just going to be completely fine coming out the end of it. Just don't panic and counter steer really hard or anything. You'll be totally fine. I've gotten oversteer when I didn't expect it multiple times going into that corner, and I was able just to get traction immediately by doing multiple things. Just a little bit of brakes, a little bit of nothing, or a little bit of throttle, and the car straightened right out. So oversteer can be scary. It's not really a big deal with this car. So with that move, just 2 laps away from the finish, we put ourselves in podium contention after being completely turned around at the beginning of the race, and I believe in fully last place. So, like I've been saying, these longer races are really fantastic, and one of the biggest things is if you mess up at the beginning, if you get wrecked, then you don't have to worry because it might not mean that your race is over. Keep your head down, keep pushing, and you might find yourself pulling off something you didn't expect. I definitely didn't expect to get on the podium after all of that, but here we are, and that right there is why this is our anti-meta car of the week. As always, thank you very much for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And did you know that I did a live stream here on my YouTube channel? If you didn't, check it out. Let me know what you think. I might start moving some more of my live streams over here instead of on Twitch where I stream full time. Let me know what you think.